Hey everyone, what's going on? So in this one, we are going to be doing a full character guide for the newest unit as of version 2.7, the brand new across all servers, Twin Wardens of the Velvet Room, Caroline and Justine. I imagine many of you decided to pull for the twins with all the hype surrounding their surprise release, and being as they are a completely new unit for all of us, there's kind of a lot to cover here, and this was a tough one to make because I'm still kind of learning about the unit as I go, as is everyone else, so if I say something here that gets kind of disproven in the coming days or weeks, my apologies ahead of time. But kicking it off, the twins are an almighty element virtuoso unit, and the virtuoso unit, as far as we can tell right now, seems to be a role that switches between all the other roles. The twins have the ability to assume the form of any of the other existing roles in the game based on which skills you select before the battle. That's essentially what their kit's gimmick is. They're incredibly malleable and will have a totally different playstyle depending on how you position their skills, what team they're on, and what role they are assuming. This is basically 6 kits in one, so trying to figure out how to piece this video together in a digestible way is my main goal, and I think I'm going to start by taking a look at some of the parts of the twins kit that'll be stagnant, meaning there are a few things pertaining to the twins that do not change based on their assigned skills and subsequent role. One of those things is the A0, and I think the A0 lays a lot of the foundation for a kit anyway, so we should start there. So for Caroline and Justine, the baseline A0 establishes the desire level system, and these desire levels are just the game's way of making the twins' skills scale across all roles from one set of stats. That might kind of sound like gibberish at first, but let me give you an example. So you know how we wanted Haru to have certain breakpoints in her stats for ailment accuracy, right? That ailment accuracy stat plays into how much damage she's doing because of the buffs from her talent, which boils down to Haru does more damage with this stat, hence you want to build into that stat. So pretty straightforward, right? Well, now what if Haru wasn't just a DPS? What if she could also be a medic? Well, in that case, you probably wouldn't care about the additional attack buffs she's getting from building into ailment accuracy because that's not really what she's focused on doing anymore, which means you would essentially have to build an entire new card set around that second role. And this is essentially the predicament the twins would find themselves in here, but instead of just with 2 roles, it's with every single role in the game. Without these desire levels, you would essentially have to have a completely separate set of stats built for every role, whereas with the desire levels, they'll buff the twin skills across the board based on one set of stats essentially. Now, will you still want to be able to customize the twins a little bit in terms of their card loadout anyway? Probably, but with the new space card nativity being added, it's possible that you can just run one build for all roles, which is what I've done here on day 1, but we can kind of get more into the card set discussion later in the video. But getting back to the actual A0, so right off the bat, it's something I don't really think was talked about enough, and it's something that I'm not really the biggest fan of, to be honest with you, and it's that after obtaining Caroline and Justine during battle, you're increasing Wonder's skills and thief tactics by 1, even when the twins are not in battle. So it's basically a passive account buff to every single one of Wonder's skills and highlights just by owning this unit. And I'm not one to cry fairness because this is a gacha game. There's nothing really like inherently competitive about this game. But this is kind of a slippery slope to go down when you start giving buffs based on just owning or not owning something when they don't even have to be in combat. But that's probably more of a discussion for another time. The A0 also sets the precedent that skill effects for the twins are affected by desire levels, as we mentioned earlier. And at the start of battle, increase desire level by 25. I believe the max desire level you can hit is 100 with just the twin stat breakpoints, and then 105 with the new nativity card. Plus with the weapon you can kind of get another 10%, but only for the skill 3, so we won't really factor it in too much. Once we actually get to the skills, you'll probably understand a little bit better how these levels are actually impacting what you're doing, but for now let's move on to the talent that will kind of define how you're getting these desire levels from stats. Again, as I mentioned before, this talent will remain the same across all forms for the twins, and it will increase their desire level at the start of combat based on the twins' stats. I'll put the exact formulas for each on screen, but what you really need to know is to hit the max desire level and get the most out of the twins, you're going to need to hit 4,500 attack, 30% damage mult, and 190% crit mult. If you hit all those breakpoints on the twins, that gives you 75 additional desire levels, plus the 25 you get flat from the A0, which puts you at 100 baseline. Then, as I mentioned before as well, you'll get an extra 5% from the nativity card, which lets you get up to 105. Then here's the point in the video where I would typically start going over all of the twins' skills and talents, but seeing as the twins are such a weird unit, I can't really format this video how I normally would, so I think what we're going to do is we'll cover the 4 skills you can pick from before the fight to assign the twins a role, and then we can go through each role one by one and get into the kit-specific stuff and see what the skill 3 and second talent will do for each role. So starting with the skills, let's kick it off with Mask of Mischief and Innocence, which will deal fire and ice damage equal to about 75% of attack for each element to one enemy, and then here is where the desire levels start to come in. You'll be adding 1% to each hit per point of desire level, and I will, for the sake of clarity, just base all of these off of 105 desire levels, which is the cap, with the space card, which would add up to 105% to each hit, I believe. I do think it's to each hit and not split between both hits, but I may be wrong there. The damage is listed separately, so I'm going to assume they are buffed separately as well. Then additionally, increase the party's attack by 39% times your desire level divided by 100 for 3 turns, which at 105 would add about 2%. Plus, you'll also gain a facade stack. So first off, let's kind of briefly hit that formula. A lot of these skills are going to have multipliers that are multiplied based on this desire formula. So if you hear me just mention desire formula at some point in this video, I'm referring to your current desire level divided by 100. So essentially, if you didn't have the nativity card and your desire was at 100, 100 divided by 100 is 1, so you really wouldn't get any buff. You would just be leaving it at the 39% for this skill, right? But at the 105, you get an additional 2%, or about 2%, it's a little bit less. And all the skills will kind of be going off of that same general formula for a lot of how the skills are being buffed by the desire levels. And then I mentioned another thing we haven't really covered, which is the facade stacks. So there isn't really a ton to say on the facade stacks per se. Essentially what they are is the skill 3 is both changing and stagnant depending on the role. It has like a stagnant effect that will persist through all the roles, and then it will have an additional effect based on the 2 facade stacks that it is consuming to apply that additional effect, which is based on the role, if that makes any sense. You can really think about it like whatever role the twins are, there's a special effect, and then you get a stack of these facade each time you use one of their skills, and when you use both skills that they have equipped, the skill 3 will become active, and then when you use the skill 3, it'll consume those 2 facade stacks, right? So you use skill 1, you get a facade stack, you use skill 2, you get a facade stack, then you can use the skill 3 to consume the 2 facade stacks, and then you basically start again. So they're essentially just counters for the skill 3, just think about it like that. And then additionally, if that wasn't already enough for you, each skill also has a highlight associated with it that'll be usable by Caroline and Justine in combat when that skill is selected before the fight. The highlights are also independent, which is pretty cool, meaning you can use both highlights the twins bring into combat back to back, meaning they have separate cooldowns. The highlight for this skill in particular will increase the party's attack by about 24% and damage dealt by about 34%. Next up is Mask of Service and Admonition. This skill will deal electric and wind damage equal to about 75% of attack for each element to one enemy, then decreases the party's damage taken by 9.8% plus another 9.8% times the desire level formula we mentioned from the last skill. Again, you're going to be getting an extra percent or 2 there when you are at 105 desire level, and it will also restore some HP to the party based on the twins' attack, and once again gain the corresponding facade stack. Then the highlight for this one is going to do much of the same as the skill by restoring HP, but this time it will also increase the party's max HP by about 10% for 2 turns. Then we have Mask of Absurdity and Nonsense, which will deal psi and nuke damage equal to about 75% of attack for each element to one enemy, again plus that desire level bonus like the first skill, and then increase the twins and one other ally's pierce rate by 4.9%, plus another 4.9%, again times the desire level formula. Also gain the corresponding facade stack. The highlight for this one is going to be dealing single target psi and nuke damage, but additionally increasing the twins' attack by about 35%, and it will do the same to the ally with the highest attack with priority on the DPS roles in Assassin and Sweepers. Lastly is going to be Mask of Luck and Loss, which will deal Bless and Curse damage equal to about 75% of attack for each element to one enemy, plus the additional damage from the desire levels like the other skills. Then it will also increase Caroline and Justine's attack, damage dealt, and crit rate by 14.6, 9.8, and 4.9 respectively. All of those have that additional damage multiplier from the desire level formula as well. This will also give you a facade stack. And then the highlight for this one will deal Bless and Curse damage to all foes and increase the twins' attack and crit damage by 29.3% and 19.5% respectively. So those are the 4 skills that'll be the basis for all of the roles you can create. Each combination of 2 shapes the twins into one of the 6 possible roles. I'll put on screen what skill creates what, and I'll also leave it in the description, but the game does a pretty good job of telling you when you swap out one skill for another. They make it pretty clear what role you are with what you have equipped on the team selection screens. And then let's quickly touch on what the skill 3 does. Now, the skill 3 is a bit unique because it does have its own effect, but additionally, depending on the role, it gains new effects. So baseline, what it does is that when you have any 2 facade stacks, so basically after you use whatever 2 skills you have equipped on the twins with that role, it becomes active. So you can't use it until you have the 2 facade stacks, but when you do use it, it will deal almighty damage to one foe with the desire level boost, and then spend all facade stacks to activate the specific role bonus effect. So it really is just doing damage, and then the additional effect will consume the 2 facade stacks and proc whatever the role specific effect is for the skill 3, which we'll cover as we move through each role individually, which we can start doing right now. I'm just going to go in order of how they were shown on the stream, so that starts us off with the medic role. Medic is a combination of the fire and ice buffing skill and the electric and wind healing skill. Like I said earlier, every role comes with what is essentially a new additional skill 3 effect and a new role specific second talent, so that they match whatever role they become a little bit better. The new skill 3 effect for medic will restore the party's HP by a good amount and increase the party's damage dealt by about 44% times that same desire formula again. The medic talent will increase healing effectiveness by 21% and then also increase the party's damage dealt by 24% passively. So even though this is a medic role, there are some buffing capabilities here as well, and the more I kind of see this role and read through the kit, I think it could be more useful than I anticipated because of the additional buffing that it can do. That guardian and medic role requirement in Guild Boss feels like an obvious target to use for this, as brought up to me in one of my previous videos, so this medic role has kind of grown on me a little bit. Next up is going to be the Strategist role, which is a combination of, again, the fire and ice skill, and this time the psi and nuke skill. Both of the skills for this one will be buffing allies, which is nice. They fit really well into the role overall. The new skill 3 effect for this one will increase the party's crit damage by 19.5% times the desire level formula once again, and it will also grant about 15% skill amplification to allies. So I'm not like 1000% sure what this means, but I think what it's trying to say is basically it'll be granting the buffs directly to the numbers on the levelable skills of allies, but independent of other buffs and stuff from those skills that may come from talents or whatever, something like that. And then the talent for this one is interesting because it will increase your speed by 5, which I think is to try and make the twins a bit faster on certain roles. There's another role that does this as well, so that you wouldn't necessarily have to speed tune them as much with cards when going between like a DPS who wants to act last, for example, and a support unit who would like to go earlier in the turn order. This talent will additionally increase the party's attack by 30% passively. I do think this is probably overall the best role. I think the 2 skills fit with the role the best. I think the new effects are pretty useful, and I would guess that over time this is the one that's just going to see the most like general use. And then we move into the sweeper role, and this one is again the fire and ice skill, but this time mixed with the bless and curse skill. The skill 3 effect here is going to make the skill 3 target all foes, so it essentially turns the skill 3 into an AoE skill, and the talent will buff the twins' crit rate by 15%. So yeah, again, I said it in my other video, but this one feels a little underwhelming to me. I'm still not completely sold on how good the DPS forms are going to be in general, but what I do know is I think the assassin role is going to be better than the sweeper form. But here's kind of the good thing about the twins is that it doesn't really matter if we know how good or bad a role is at this very moment, because we kind of have to level up all their stuff and build them the same way regardless, so it doesn't really change anything outside of maybe a couple of cards if you wanted to here and there, but generally it's just a matter of switching the roles and the build remains the same, so we don't have to have all the answers right now because they're going to be built out the same regardless. Following sweeper is going to be guardian, and this is a combination of the electric and wind skill as well as the psi and nuke skill. The new skill 3 effect here will now additionally grant shields to the party based on Caroline and Justine's attack, and will also increase the party's defense by almost 49% times the desire level formula again. And then the talent will up the amount of shields by 21%. The talent in this role just disappoints me a little bit because I think they could have made it a lot more useful with Vox in particular if the talent also additionally did some kind of damage up for shielded allies or something like that, but to me it feels a little bit underwhelming compared to some of the other buffs from the talents with other roles. Even the medic role has pretty good like additional buffing potential, so I kind of wish they had done a little bit more of the same for this one, but still it accomplishes what it sets out to do as far as sustain capabilities can go, and it can help fill in on a Fox team or for other event content. Next up is Saboteur, and this one is a combination of the electric and wind skill with the bless and curse skill. The skill 3 effect on this one is kind of a mouthful. It inflicts shock, windswept, 2 curse stacks, decreases the foe's defense by almost 26%, plus another 26% times the desire level formula, and will also give you 2 blessing stacks. So just kind of a mishmash of random stuff. I guess it's technically the elements with the associated skills is kind of the idea here. But yeah, still a lot kind of just jam-packed into one skill effect. The talent on this one will give you 5 speed, much like the Strategist role one did, and increase the foe's damage taken by 24% passively. This role reminds me a little bit of like a Rin style debuffer, lots of the same things in the defense shred and damage up. I imagine this could see some use in like super high defense base stat bosses maybe, but again, I think it's going to depend largely on who else you have on your roster. And then lastly, we have the assassin role, which will be the psi and nuke skill with the bless and curse skill. This will give us the skill 3 effect of dealing an additional hit of almighty damage and gaining rebel surveillance for 2 turns. Rebel surveillance Surveillance will essentially take about 5% of the effect stats from the DPS ally with the highest attack. Again, I don't fully know if I understand 1000% what they mean by effect stats, but what it seems like is you'll take some stats from another ally to buff yourself with. So like if the twins were a sub DPS with Joker on the team, when they use their skill 3, they'll share about 5% of Joker's stats, and they list the stats out in the effects thing with themselves for 2 turns is kind of how I'm understanding it right now. And then the talent for this one will increase crit damage for the twins by 30% in line with the role. Again, of the 2 DPS roles, I do think the assassin one seems better on paper, but I'm going to need to playtest it more with them to tell you if I think they're ever going to be worth using as your main DPS when you have the other best in slot DPS for whatever element it is as an option. But I do think this could certainly work if you don't have that DPS in certain content. And that will finally do it for all 6 roles. I guess the next thing I would want to cover is skill level priority, which honestly, I just leveled up all of them because it really depends on what you're doing on which role. That'll determine kind of what you want leveled up. And considering the twins are doing everything potentially, I think it's best to kind of just go ahead and level everything. But moving on from that, next up would be awarenesses. Now, you guys know if you've seen any of my other content that I'm not really someone who chases dupes, but I do know there are a lot of people who do look to capitalize on good value awarenesses. So I do think it's important to at least cover them briefly. So let's start with the A1, Strict Tolerance, which I do think is actually quite good. I mean, these are all good, so I guess it's not saying much, but the A1 in particular will, at the start of battle, give Caroline and Justine 2 facade stacks based on starting personas, and at the start or end of the twins' turns, if they have 2 types of facade, you'll automatically activate the skill 3 on a random target 1 time, and it'll prioritize previously targeted foes if possible with it. This one actually goes really well with the weapon too, which we'll cover later, but the reason being is the weapon will give you up to 2 stacks of pretty good buffs if you have 2 stacks of facade. So to start combat with 2 stacks from this awareness lets you kind of proc that buff off rip, and additionally lets you auto trigger the skill 3 from the get-go as well. So I do think if you're someone who chases good value dupes, I actually think this could be a justifiable option for you. Next up is the A2, which when a facade is gained, you gain an additional buff depending on the type of facade gained. I won't read them all out, but you can see them on screen, and basically they go hand in hand with whatever the skill you gain the facade from is doing. Like the Fire and Ice skill that buffs party attack will give you an additional attack buff, etc. So again, not bad. The A3 Punitive Mercy is just one of these skill level breakthrough awarenesses. Every unit has 2 awareness levels that essentially just break through your skills so you can get them beyond level 10. I'm sure you've seen this with some of your 4-star units potentially, so not much to say on this one. The A4 Execution of Rebirth will increase the twins' attack and damage dealt when they use a highlight, and then grant 50% of that buff to all allies. So an interesting one here that buffs them as DPS, but then additionally also helps the team a little bit too. The A5 Humane Prison is another skill level breakthrough, so we don't really need to cover this one either. Then lastly is the A6, Power to Resist Ruin, and it is very wordy, so if you want to read it, I'll have it on screen, but generally it increases Wonder's skill levels by 1 again, raises the desire level cap, and then adds a new True Desire effect that you get once every 9 turns, so probably only happens once in most content that we're normally doing, where it's like 6 turns at max. And then it does all kinds of crazy stuff to the skill 3 with every element, and yeah, it's an A6. It's gonna be wild if you decide to go for it. And then, are you guys sick of my voice yet, by the way? I certainly am, but we've got more to go, so let's move swiftly into the weapons. I generally do think the twins' 5-star weapon, Warden's Judgment, is quite good, but first let's take a peek at the 4-star just so we can see if maybe it'll be able to suffice. And as always, we'll take a look at the 4-star at R6 to make it a little bit more fair by comparison. So the 4-star weapon is called Deliverance of Strength, and it is going to be increasing attack by 24%, and then when 2 masks as 1, the skill 3 is activated, increase attack by 43% for 2 turns. So I don't think it's like terrible, but I just feel like the 5-star is doing so much more in terms of like versatile buffing, especially for the rest of your team, whereas this is really just for the twins. And then moving into the 5-star Warden's Judgment, it will be increasing attack by 30%. When the skill 3 is activated, increase desire level by 10%. And then most importantly, in my opinion, is when a facade is gained, increase party's critical damage by 13% and damage dealt by 13% for 2 turns, and this stacks up to 2 times. So when you have both facade stacks, you'll be getting a 26% boost to critical damage and damage dealt for the entire team for 2 turns. I think this weapon is like quite good. I think it is a fairly substantial upgrade over the 4-star weapon even at the R6. So I think if you're capable of getting to it, I do think it is quite a good upgrade. And I say it in every one of these videos, but whenever we do finally get the inner track of Mindscape, which I think should be relatively soon, I'll incorporate that into these guides. It's just as of now, there's not really a point in discussing it, as the buffs on the outer track just really aren't worth talking about. And so with that said, I think we can move into the last part of this video, unless I've forgotten something critically important, which is possible. That is going to be the card sets, and I did mention it quickly near the start of the video, but they have added a new space card that is essentially specifically made for Caroline and Justine. It's called Nativity, and it was presumably added to make it so that you wouldn't feel like you had to swap an entire new card set on the twins for every team and every role, especially when we don't have loadouts in the game yet. If you want to use Nativity, you're going to have to use Power with it, because there is no other set bonus associated with this space card, so that kind of helps make things a little bit simpler, I guess. I will be using Nativity and Power for this video, and I will be using it on my Caroline and Justine going forward for the time being, but I have like this sneaking suspicion that if you're already at the 100 desire levels, the bonus you get from the additional like 5 desire levels, I don't really know if it's like totally worth it. Again, I'm gonna have to like test this a lot more, but I do feel like you could potentially end up like squeezing a little bit more out of the twins if you were to like separately swap in card sets for like every single role in every situation. But honestly, that's so much work in building cards and keeping track of what's equipped and for what content. So I think for most of us, the best option is just going to be to run this with Nativity and Power until something else is proven to be like consistently better. But if you are a mad scientist and want to mix and match for every role or something, let me know how it goes. I'm curious. But again, for most of us, I think we're just going to stick with Nativity and Power, and that will suffice. So as for what I'm running on each power card individually, we already know we want to hit 4,500 attack, 190% crit damage, and 30% damage mult. So that's what we're aiming for as far as main and substats go for the most part. I would say attack is also the like lowest priority of those 3 priorities too, since a lot of stuff can buff that up at the start of battle, including the 5-star weapon. And again, remember, much like Haru with her ailment accuracy, you don't have to hit these numbers out of combat. I'm not at these numbers out of combat, and I am at 105 desire level like in everything I've tested the twins in so far. I would just jump into combat maybe with whatever you have equipped currently and see where you're at, and then maybe kind of just tweak it a little bit from there. But for the Sun card, we have to have HP as the main stat, but again, shooting for attack, damage mult, and crit mult where we can, while also trying to grab some crit rate and pierce rate too, which is kind of what I've done on this card. Would have preferred more rolls into crit mult here, but not bad for kind of just like what I had on hand. And then for my moon card, I went with damage mult just to ensure that I hit the number if I could, and then I got some attack and crit mult substats here as well. As for star, I actually went with crit rate, and I did this because if I went crit mult here, I would have barely had any crit rate on the unit, and since I'm hitting that desire level limit in battle anyway, I've opted to go for this card, since it did additionally roll into crit mult a little bit anyways. I probably still need to reset this one to get rid of these terrible defense rolls, or just find a better card in general. And then on the sky card, I went with attack, and this is the only attack main stat sky card with any decent substat options that I had, so I kind of went with it, but of course it could stand to be upgraded. But you can kind of see the idea here, right? Get as close to those breakpoints as you can, test and see what you can afford to get away with as far as not building into those stats. And where you end up at the start of combat, it lists your desire level if you click on the twins in battle, so you can get like a really easy idea of like where you're at right at the beginning of the fight. So you can just jump into any content essentially with the team that you plan on bringing for something, and you'll be able to tell pretty quickly if you're going to be at the desire level or not. But I wouldn't just ignore these desire levels. I do think they're like a pretty important part of the kit, but there are ways to maybe kind of work around it where you can still hit those desire levels and then cheese out some other stats on top of it. And then for these videos, I also typically like to try and give you an idea of like what teams or units might work best with the twins, but the twins kind of work with everything essentially because they are everything. You can slot them in wherever you want. I kind of feel like they're going to raise the floor of a lot of accounts with how versatile they are and with how many holes they can plug if you skip certain units, and they even give you kind of future sight, future proofing if you want to skip a future unit. So yeah, I'm kind of sticking firm to my stance that I gave on my Should You Pull video, where I think for a free-to-play or low spender who skips a lot of units and kind of has a lot of gaps in their account that they might struggle to fill otherwise, the twins are like a must-have. And then people like me, or people who just kind of end up going for most, if not all characters, I think you are going to struggle a little bit to find a place where like the twins are definitively the best option to use over something else you might already have. But regardless, I'm happy to have them. I think they're a really cool unit, and I would like them to continue to keep doing more stuff like this. But yeah, I think that kind of covers everything. Hopefully you were able to take something useful out of this one. There was so much to cover here, and I didn't really want this to turn into a video essay, although it kind of may have ended up being one. But there's probably still going to be a ton of questions or things left unanswered, so feel free to leave them for me in the comments, and I'll try my best to answer whatever I can for you. It's going to take some time for all of us to figure out where the twins best fit, the little nuances of the kit, etc. We don't have the benefit of foresight like we've had for every other unit from the other servers basically playtesting the unit for us. We're all in it together on this one, so not all of the questions are going to be answered right now. So if I missed anything, or I am slightly confused or got something wrong at all in this, my apologies. We can maybe do like an updated twins Twins Guide in a few months if a ton of meta stuff changes surrounding them, but for now, I hope this is enough to at least get you started and on the right track. Thank you all for watching. Merry Christmas and Happy Holidays to everybody. I appreciate all the support this year so far. It's totally blown away any expectations I had for this channel, and I do look forward to my first full year of content creation next year in 2026 with as many improvements in as many areas as possible along the way. Thanks again, everybody. I will see you on the next one, and have a good one.